Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, different newspaper articles, and we look at them with our modern eyes and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking at an article from the London Magazine from May 1768, and it is entitled Claims of the French to Newfoundland Revived. So Newfoundland, if you're not aware, is an island in Canada. I thought it was interesting that the French ever had claims on that area, but I mean, the French were all over North America, so it was slightly difficult to predict where they were at any given time. So I thought that would be interesting to take a look at, in case anyone else was as unaware as I was that it was a thing. So let's take a look. Sorry, I have a little bit of cold. Don't worry, it's not corona, but just in case you were noticing my stuffy nose. So, the claims of the French to Newfoundland considered. Having long been induced to think from common report that the island of Newfoundland belonged to the English, and that the French fished there only by permission, I was surprised to hear, after the commencement of the late peace, that the French assumed a right by the Treaty of Utrecht to dispossess the English of their plantations to the northward of Cape Bonavista and round the sea-coast to Point Rich, and that they have actually begun in part to exercise that right, insomuch that they say, if a French ship gets into any harbor of the northward of Bonavista before the ship of the English merchant is liable to be dispossessed, but not if the English merchant ship arrives first. In consequence of which interpretation, one or two settlers have actually been dispossessed of their plantations, which makes the English live in fear, and so proves a hurt to their fishery. Now that was an extremely long sentence, but it does show that the writer of this article also thought the way I did. Like, really? The French are in Canada? I mean, obviously the French are in Canada. I mean, for heaven's sake, Quebec is French-speaking. However, I was not aware that they had a claim to Newfoundland, which I thought was English. But hey, what do I know? Let's take a look. Also, I did look this up on Wikipedia, and apparently there was a Treaty of Utrecht. Utrecht is a city in Netherlands, and 1713. Then they signed a Treaty of Utrecht where the French released control of the south and north shores of the island to the British. They kept only the nearby islands of Saint-Pierre and I don't know how to pronounce this one, Miquelon. I'll write it on the screen. And it's mostly for fishing rights, because apparently there's lots of fish in that area. Makes sense, it is an island. So I just want to let you know that that's where it was. Originally, in fact, the French gave the island its name. The original name of the island, at least by white people, thank you, is Terre Neuve, and that it literally translates to new land, yeah? So Newfoundland is the English interpretation of that. Anyways, but actually it's been speculated that Newfoundland was the original site of Vinland from Leif Erikson. It is believed to be the Vinland settlement of explorer Leif Erikson. The Icelandic Skaholt map of 1570 refers to the area as Promontorium Vinlandae, and correctly shows it on a 51st north parallel with Bristol, England. So, if you're going by that and assuming that it was accurate, then technically the first European settlers were Norse. So, Norwegians were there first. Anyways, but they weren't there for very long. Anyways, the French ended up settling it, but apparently there were a whole bunch of different people. Portuguese, Spanish, Basque, French, and English. And they were mostly migratory fishermen, so nobody really lived there until later. But the French felt like it was theirs for a while, and they gave up that right in the Treaty of Utrecht. Anyway, so I just wanted to give you some background on that. I was not aware of that, so I thought you might find that interesting. The article of the treaty on which they ground their claim runs thus. The island of Newfoundland, with the adjacent islands, shall belong of right wholly to Great Britain, but the subjects of France shall be allowed to catch fish and dry them on the land, in that part only of the said islands, and no other which stretches from the place called Cape Bonavista, Cape Bonavista, to the northern part of the said island, and from thence running down the western side, reaching as far as the place called Point Rich. But the French shall not erect any buildings there, besides stages made of boards, and huts necessary and usual for drying of fish, or resort to the said island beyond the time necessary for fishing and drying of fish. Can it be imagined from this article that the English meant to exclude themselves from building anywhere between Bonavista and Point Rich, an extent or compass of sea coast greater than the English have, or make use of to the southward of Bonavista? Or rather, does not the right to allow the French to build imply a right to build in him that allows it? If this is not admitted, it will then follow that more of Newfoundland is theirs than ours, and so we shall be left with only a nominal proprietorship, while the French are in actual possession, or at least the true intent of the treaty will be so inverted that the French to the northward of Bonavista will be dictators to us instead of our being so to them. Yeah, they got a point there. I mean, they did say in the treaty that it belongs to the British. And if the French are saying, no, you can't build there because we can't build there, like that's a little illogical now, isn't it? I mean, what's the point of that? Yeah. I don't want to get too deep into this, but I think that it is interesting to say that another country can't do anything on their own property because a different country isn't allowed to. You know, like what one person is not allowed to do doesn't mean that another person is not allowed to do it too. It's kind of like I explain to people ask about my accent sometimes, and I'll say just because I speak one language doesn't mean I don't speak another. I'm just saying. And it's the same kind of a thing here. Like, because if you don't have permission to build somewhere, it does not follow that your neighbor also doesn't have permission to build there. I'm just saying. It can hardly be imagined that any nation in Europe, in consequence of this article, will pretend to justify the French in interrupting the English in their new settlements for the fishery. And yet ever since the last peace was concluded, they have come back from the northward to the English settlements to lay their claims, and have actually taken possession of some plantations greatly to the prejudice of the owners. And in so great fear do the English planters live of being hurt by such proceedings, that on a French vessel coming into the harbour of Twillingate in the spring of the year 1767, and demanding a room, they joined to the great hindrance of their own fishery in sending their boats and men to get trees out of the woods, for the Frenchmen to build, etc., and he might not dispossess them from their own plantations. But whilst such humiliating concessions cannot but give diversion to the French, so remarkable for their vanity, it must sting a true Briton to the heart to see his countrymen toiling and bending under French insolence for building on their own ground. It's a true story. So they're telling a story about how there were some English fishers on the island, and that some French people came and they said, hey, you have to help us build something too, or else you have to be kicked out of the island. So apparently he forced them to help them build something, but they were only allowed to build huts for drying their fish, so I'm not sure what they were trying to build. But it's like, if you were on your own land and you're building something in your own land, like, you should not be afraid of somebody coming by and saying, you have to build me one too, or you have to get out of here, because it's your land. So I can see why they would be upset by that. As everyone who suffers in his property is to be pitied, I cannot conclude without mentioning the great loss of the inhabitants of the island of St. Peter's, sustained at the commencement of the peace, when, in obedience to the government, they delivered up their plantations, and in so doing some delivered up their all, to the French for the national good. Saint-Pierre, right? Didn't they say that? That it belonged to the French? So the English settlers that lived there already had to leave, I guess. And just leaving everything behind. That sucks. Surely these injured people are in justice entitled to some compensation, but I am told they have yet received none. I would willingly hope, however, that the disregard shewn in this account and the not settling things better to the northward of Bonavista for the relief of such as live in continual fear of what the French may do to their prejudice is owing rather to the unsettled state of the military since the conclusion of the peace than to their want of feeling. Wow. So they got kicked out of their lands and they haven't received any compensation. And they're just hoping that the reason that happened is because of how disorganized the military is at the moment, and not necessarily because they just didn't want to do anything, and that's their hope. And that notwithstanding this seeming neglect, we may yet have things settled on a better foundation, and more to the encouragement of the English fishery than they are at present. For it appears from what happened a little before our last rupture with France, that our ministry can debate on a treaty with spirit, when they are resolved not to be imposed upon, for then the French ministry's explanation of the Treaty of Utrecht about Nova Scotia and Acadia were treated with the contempt they deserved. Why, then, should we not dispute with the French on the same treaty with the same resolution now, if the rights of the subject require it? Honestly, what they're saying makes perfect sense to me. They're saying, hey, we fought really hard for Nova Scotia and Acadia to be part of our territory, and we fought to defend it as well. Why are we not doing the same with Newfoundland? We're just saying, whatever. The French are being mean, so just ignore them. Do we ignore bullies? Yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to, is are we willing to ignore bullies when they're bullying? I don't really agree with that, so no, I can definitely see where they're coming from. It's interesting to see history from this perspective, because I don't know that I was aware that there was any dispute about Newfoundland before. I thought it was all very peaceful, but looking back, it wasn't. It didn't go quite so smoothly, what did it? So it's really nice to see people's insights that they had at the time. And that's why I'm so grateful for old newspapers, because this is exactly what they do. They give us the perspective where at that moment it was current events, and today it's history. And really, really bring it to life, don't they? Anyway, so thank you very much for joining us for this Microfiche microphone, and I hope that you will join us for the next video. And please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.